Let's start by doing an introduction to cloud computing. Before cloud computing, if we actually look 10 to 15 years back, in each company's data centers, we had a ton of servers, and each server had a different purpose, maybe running on a different hardware and even with different operating systems. Each new application that you installed, the vendor required that their application ran on a dedicated server. Each one of those servers had their own CPU, RAM, and hard drive resources, of course, and each one of them needed enough resources for utilization at peak time. But what this did is that on average, most servers were really underutilized, and organizations were spending a ton of money on hardware that most of the time was not even used at 10% of its capability. We then started to implement virtualization, which allowed us to run multiple virtual machines on a virtual host, so we were able to get more usage out of our hardware and cut down space, cooling, and of course costs. However, even with virtualization, we still had a few disadvantages such as high upfront costs, since we needed to buy really powerful virtual hosts, and then we needed to keep them for 5 years so they paid themselves off. We then still needed to pay for space in the data center, as well as electricity and utility costs for cooling and other server needs. Furthermore, hardware maintenance was still needed and is still needed in virtualization environments, as this can break down, network cards can go bad, and so on. Virtualization is really a lot better than dedicated hardware, so don't get me wrong, but there is still space for improvement, and this is where cloud computing comes in. Cloud computing enables companies to consume a compute resource, such as a virtual machine, storage, or an application, as a utility just like electricity, rather than having to build and maintain computing infrastructures in-house. In a cloud environment, you have the cloud provider, which owns the data center and manages all of the hardware like servers, networking, and of course, virtualization. As the cloud is fully built on the principle of virtualization, no client has ever direct access to the hardware, simply to a virtualized environment. All of those resources are pulled together and then shared to multiple clients that all consume the same hardware. Those clients do not need to know on what servers they run, or how many servers their different environments are running on. They simply consume a service, and the cloud provider is the one making sure there are enough shared resources to handle everything. In a cloud environment, users simply select what services they want to use, with each service having a price per user or per minute of utilization of that specific resource. This way, organizations can be more dynamic and cost-effective and reduce upfront cost. Since the money you pay for cloud does not get deprecated over multiple years, it's really a resource you use right away. The cloud cost usually goes into the operating expenses, or OpEx, instead of the capital expenditures or CapEx. So this really allows you to deduct costs in the current year without needing to deprecate the hardware cost over multiple years. And this depending on how your accounting is set up, and I don't want to get really into accounting details in this course, but this can have a really big tax advantage for your company. Here's an example of billing or cost for the cloud. Here we're calculating the cost of a virtual machine inside Microsoft Azure. First of all, I need to select the specifications of the virtual machine that I want. In this case, I'm selecting a virtual machine with 2 cores and 8 GB of RAM. You can see right away the cost would be about 15 cents an hour. I can also select the operating system, in this case Windows. And because Microsoft owns Windows, the cost that I pay for this virtual machine also includes the cost for the Windows operating system it'll be using, so I'm getting that license as a service as well. For the estimate, I can also choose how many hours I expect this virtual machine to be used per month. So if I use this VM for 730 hours, my cost would be $110 per month. And as you can see, in Azure, virtual machines are billed per second, so it's really flexible. Most cloud providers will also offer you savings if you prepay for a number of years. So let's say I noted I will need this VM for 3 years, I could save up to 55% of my computing costs, which would make sense if some servers are always up. Cloud services can also be scaled depending on demand and even automatically. In this screenshot, I have an app service plan in Azure, which is a platform in which you could host websites. I could enable auto scale on it. This way, I can see, for example, when the CPU usage goes above 70%, add more CPUs or instances to that service. This can be really useful for public websites or different apps, so you can pay a set amount at rest or when they're not used a lot. But if you have a peak where lots of people are connecting at the same time, it will increase the resource only for that set amount of time. Something else that is a big advantage of the cloud is reliability. In a cloud scenario, the cloud provider takes care of the high availability and disaster recovery plans of their platform. Just to go over those terms so you see what the difference between those two is, high availability is usually to protect us against software and hardware failures. Those are usually very local, like a rack goes down, a server loses power, a service crashes, or something like that. On the other side, disaster recovery is something much bigger, like a natural or human-induced disaster, for example, a flood, fire, an earthquake that puts the whole data center down. The cost to implement the high availability in-house can grow really, really quickly because you might need a second data center on the other side of the country for which you need to pay for servers, networking, utilities, and so on. So from a cost perspective, the cloud can offer a much better solution for a better cost. Now that we have looked at what the cloud is and some advantages, let's learn what are the different types of cloud computing, deployment models, and services. There are a few types of cloud deployment models out there. The first one, and probably the most popular one, is the public cloud, where you have a cloud vendor that provides cloud services to multiple clients. All those clients securely share the same hardware in the back end. A private cloud, on the other hand, is when the hardware is only used by a single company, which most of the time, but not necessarily always, also owns the hardware and data center. This is very close to the traditional data center model we always had, but in a private cloud most of the time IT, which manages the data center, builds the different departments for the services that they do. Next up, we have a hybrid cloud, which is a combination of both a public and a private cloud with automation and orchestration between the two. And the last option is a community cloud, which is a shared infrastructure between several organizations with common security, compliance, and jurisdiction concerns. We often see the example of community cloud when governments from different countries set up a shared services division that hosts all of the IT for that government. Now that we have looked at the types of deployment models, there are also different types of computing services. The three main ones are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Let's take a look at what the differences are. What really differs between the deployment models is how much you manage versus how much the vendor manages. Let's start with on-premises, where it's pretty easy. You're the one that manages everything from storage to the data center to networking, virtualizations, and applications on top of it. Infrastructure as a service delivers cloud computing infrastructure to an organization, including things such as servers, networking, storage, true virtualization technology. You, as the client, still manage the operating systems, applications, data, and everything really on top of the virtualization layer. Platform as a service provides cloud components to certain software, while being mainly used for applications. Platform as a service provides a framework for developers that they can build upon and use to create customized applications. All servers, storage, and networking is managed by the third-party provider, while developers maintain the management of applications. Our last option is software as a service, in which you simply enjoy the service, pay a fee, but you don't manage anything at all. Everything is managed by the vendor. A majority of software as a service applications are run directly through the web browsers and do not require any downloads or installations on the client side. While this may seem a bit complicated to grasp at first, let's take a look at the same model, but from a different perspective. Let's compare our cloud computing services to everyone's favorite food, pizza. Our on-premises model would be similar to making pizza at home from scratch. You make your own dough, you cut your own toppings, you put it in your own oven, you pay for the electricity, and you eat at your own table. Our infrastructure as a service model is similar to getting frozen pizza from the supermarket and cooking it at home. You pay for part of the service, you pay for the basics, the pizza dough, the tomato sauce, toppings, cheese, but you still cook it yourself, you eat it at your own table, and if you decide that you like it a bit overcooked, you can still get it a bit overcooked. No problem. The platform as a service is similar to pizza delivery, where the pizza comes to you already made and hot, you simply need to pour the drinks, and then eat it at your own table. Finally, the software as a service is like dining out. You don't have to bring or make anything, everything is taken care of by the vendor, you simply pay the bill for what you consume. Hopefully, this comparison with pizza allows you to better view the differences between the different cloud computing service models. Let's take a look at some example cloud vendors and services in each category. For infrastructures as a service, some of the big players are Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, Google Compute Engine, and Rackspace. Of course, the one in orange, Microsoft Azure, is the one provided by Microsoft since this is a Microsoft course, but I wanted you to have some third parties that you might have heard of to compare it with. In the platform as a service, some of the big players are, again, Azure with different services like Azure Logic Apps, Azure Functions, and things like that. Heroku, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, and many others. In the software as a service, we're looking at Office 365 by Microsoft, Google has their Google G Suite, Salesforce, and Dropbox are other examples of really big software as a service vendors. Of course, those are just a few of the most popular ones, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of cloud providers with the software as a service, one probably being the most popular one. Let's start with the introduction to Microsoft 365. Before we talk about Microsoft 365 specifically, let's take a step back and think about what Microsoft is known for. What do you think when you think Microsoft? The first thing is probably Windows, and I'm sure that many of you are watching this on a Windows operating system right now, such as Windows 7 or Windows 10. We also have the popular Microsoft Office, which contains Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote, and so on, and those are just both on the consumer, as well as the business side. But if we look at the business side more specifically, we also have Microsoft Azure and the Office 365 cloud platforms, and lastly, security and device management solutions such as Intune, System Center Configuration Manager, and so on. So what does this have to do with Microsoft 365? Microsoft 365 is positioned as a complete solution for your enterprise productivity needs. Microsoft 365 is a single subscription which gives you access to Windows 10, Office 365, which includes the Office client, and the enterprise mobility and security tools, also known as EMS. As Microsoft puts it, it's a single solution that gives you all of the tools that you need for productivity inside your organization in a single subscription. Let's take a look more in detail at each of those products. First of all, Office 365. Office 365 is a software as a service suite offering Microsoft's latest collaboration tools. It includes tools such as Exchange for emails, SharePoint for enterprise collaboration, Microsoft Teams, and Skype for business for instant communication, Yammer, which is an enterprise social network. It also includes the full Office suite so you can have Word, PowerPoint, Excel, OneNote on your computer, as well as in the browser, and multiple other tools such as Flow, Power Apps, Stream, Planner, and many more. Next up in our overview of Microsoft 365 services is Windows 10. Microsoft 365 comes with Windows 10 Enterprise for each user, so you really have the best version of Windows 10 included. Even if it doesn't look at least today that Microsoft will release a new version of Windows anytime soon, by being subscribed to Microsoft 365, you'll always have access to the latest version of Windows available. Next up in the list of tools included is the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, most often called EMS. EMS is an intelligent mobility management and security platform, and it helps protect and secure your organization and empowers your employees to work in new and flexible ways. EMS contains multiple tools for multiple purposes. For identity and access management, we have Azure Active Directory, and Microsoft 365 actually includes Azure Active Directory Premium, which gives you a lot of features not found in the basic version. We also have different tools for managing devices and apps with Microsoft Intune and System Center Configuration Manager. For threat protection, we actually have quite a few products that complement each other depending on what workload you are trying to protect. We have Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, Office 365, and Azure Advanced Threat Protection. This is not all. I actually need to put a second slide because there are so many tools in EMS. We also have the information protection part, which is Office 365 data loss prevention, Azure information protection, and the Microsoft Cloud App Security that allow you to govern, for example, what kind of files can be shared outside of the organization, what type of files can be sent by email. You could automatically block, let's say, patient records from being sent by email to an external recipient. So you have a lot of flexibility in how you govern your information. Lastly, we have the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center as an easy portal where you can manage security across the Microsoft 365 suite. Next up is Microsoft Azure. Microsoft Azure is an ever-expanding set of cloud services to help your organization meet your business challenges. There are multiple Azure services included in your Microsoft 365 subscription, such as Azure Active Directory, and multiple others we have named just a few seconds ago. However, there are a ton of other services that you can leverage at a separate cost. Those services are a pay-per-usage model, so you can consume the ones you need for as long as you need. The advantage of leveraging Azure instead of other competing products such as AWS is that since you're in the Microsoft stack already, you can make sure that all of the services you use will really be integrated. When I said ever-expanding a few seconds ago, it's because Microsoft Azure has been the cloud platform that probably added the most new offerings over the past years. And when it initially got released, it was mostly for virtual machines and infrastructure as a service. But now there are over 100 different services that Microsoft Azure provides, and only in the compute category shown in the website screenshot on the slide, you can see over 10 different services. So let's concentrate on the top 2 use cases in the most popular ones used in Azure. First of all, Azure Infrastructure as a Service, which is what Azure started with and probably still one of the most popular offerings. Azure Infrastructure as a Service, or Azure Compute, allows you to create virtual machines, virtual networks, and storage of all sizes and run the different workloads you might need in the cloud instead of needing to host your own services in the data center. As you might already know, Microsoft is a lot more open to other platforms these days, so it's not only limited to Windows. There's a wide variety of virtual machines, including Linux virtual machines, that you can use on those virtual machines. There's a wide array of operating systems that you can use on those virtual machines. Another very popular part of Azure is the platform as a service part of Azure with tools such as App Service, Azure Web Apps, and Azure Logic Apps allowing you to create apps and workflows and only focus on the code without needing to worry about the hardware, availability, and network in the back. Simply create your app and publish it worldwide on the Azure infrastructure in a matter of minutes. Lastly, Azure Stack, which is an extension of Azure that allows you to leverage the Azure platform in your data center and hybrid scenarios. This allows you to run applications on the same platform on the edge, which is a bit of Microsoft marketing talk for hybrid cloud, as well as fully disconnected solutions. It allows you to run cloud applications that connect to local data that remains on-premises for regulatory requirements, but keep a single development DevOps and maintenance stack. So this way, we're sure developers know how to code for Azure, and your IT pros know how to manage it. They only have a single platform to manage even if sometimes the data is in the cloud and other times it's on-premises. There are multiple versions of Microsoft 365. First of all, on the enterprise side, we have Microsoft 365 E3 and E5, E5 being the one with the most features, as well as Microsoft 365 F1, which is for field workers. The big difference between E3 and E5 is in the services that are included, but mostly the plan of each service. For example, Microsoft 365 E5 has Azure AD Premium Plan 2, where E3 has Azure AD Premium Plan 1. The F1 plan is for field workers and contains only the online version of Office, and not the hard client version, so it's really much cheaper than the Enterprise or E versions. There's also a version of Microsoft 365 in that smaller enterprise called Microsoft 365 Business. However, it's limited to a maximum of 300 users, over which you need to go to the enterprise version of the subscription. Now, where do Microsoft 365 services fit inside the different cloud computing services? From an infrastructure as a service point of view, we have Microsoft Azure Compute, which allows us to create virtual machines in a matter of seconds. From a platform as a service perspective, we have Azure Logic Apps, Azure Web Apps, and a ton of other services that reside inside the Azure platform. Lastly, for software as a service, we have the Microsoft Office 365 collaboration platform. From a cloud deployment model point of view, Office 365 and Azure both reside inside the public cloud, whereas private and hybrid clouds would use Azure Stack to run our applications. For a community cloud, we have specialized versions of Azure and Office 365, such as Azure and Office 365 Government, and even for specific countries that have special regulatory requirements such as Office 365 Germany and Office 365 China operated by 21 Vianet. Those specific versions of Office 365 and Azure actually get features months, if not maybe even years later than the public cloud version because of all of the additional certifications they must go through in order to satisfy the requirements for those client communities. Let's start by doing an overview of Microsoft 365 subscriptions. There are multiple versions of Microsoft 365. First of all, on the enterprise side, we have Microsoft 365 E3 and E5, E5 being the one with the most features, as well as Microsoft 365 F1, which is for field workers. There is also a version of Microsoft 365 aimed at smaller enterprises called Microsoft 365 Business, a version for education called Microsoft 365 Education, and a version for the US government called Microsoft 365 Government. Let's take a look at those in detail. Microsoft 365 Business is an integrated solution that brings together best-in-class productivity tools, security, and device management capabilities for small to medium-sized businesses. Since this is aimed at smaller to medium-sized businesses, it's capped at a maximum number of 300 users. Over this, you'll have to use a Microsoft 365 Enterprise version. Microsoft 365 Business comes with Windows 10 Business, which is a special SKU that you cannot really buy directly because Windows 10 Business is basically Windows 10 Pro plus additional cloud-enabled features around security and identity. It also comes with Office 365 Business Premium, which includes your classic Office 365 features such as SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, Planner, and so on, and it also includes some SMB-only apps such as Microsoft Invoicing, Microsoft Bookings, MailIQ, and so on. However, on the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, or EMS, it lags behind the enterprise version of Microsoft 365 and does not contain features such as Azure Active Directory Premium. Those can be purchased separately as add-ons. Now, how much does it cost? Microsoft 365 Business is offered at $20 per user per month based on an annual contract if you purchase it directly from Microsoft. When purchased from Microsoft Partner, pricing can vary based on the services the partner provides and their pricing model for Microsoft 365 Business. If you want to see the full list of features, the best way to go is the Microsoft 365 Business Service description, for which you can find a link in the slides. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft 365 Enterprise. Microsoft 365 Enterprise is available in 3 different plans, as we have discussed earlier. First one being Microsoft 365 E3, which comes with an Office 365 E3 license, Windows 10 Enterprise, as well as the EMS suite. E5 includes all of E3's capabilities, as well as advanced security, voice, and data analysis tools. For example, E5 includes Office 365 E5, which has Power BI Pro, includes Azure Active Directory Premium 2 licenses, and so on. The last one, which is the F1, which is for first-line workers or field workers. Those are users who usually do not spend their day in front of the computer, only use one when needed. It's also a lot cheaper than an E3 or E5 license, however, it's missing some features, such as being able to install Office on a computer. Those users can still use Office online, but simply cannot install the heavy client locally on a PC. Now a bit about pricing. Pricing for the enterprise version is not available on the public website, however, if you already have an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 subscription, you can see them in the billing section. Because I'm in Canada, it shows me the prices in Canadian dollars, so it might be a bit of a higher number, let's say, than in US dollars, but this gives you a good idea of how much it costs. The best way to purchase it if you don't have a subscription already is either to contact your Microsoft account manager or your Microsoft partner. Remember that prices can always change, but this is what I had as of May 2019, just to give you an idea. Comparing all of the Microsoft 365 plans can be a bit complicated in slides, especially as it has an ever-evolving set of tools that change from time to time. The best location to find the latest information is on the Compare All Microsoft 365 Enterprise Plans page. Now let's talk a bit about the industry, or vertical-specific ones, starting with Microsoft 365 Education. Microsoft 365 Education is a subscription that is only available to education clients such as colleges, universities, high schools, and so on. It also has additional features that are built specifically for education clients such as classroom management. Now I usually don't talk about licensing because Microsoft licensing is a separate PhD, which I don't have. However, Microsoft Education is usually free for students when you buy it for educators, faculty, and staff. But always check with your Microsoft licensing expert because licensing can always change. Lastly, Microsoft 365 Government. Microsoft 365 Government is a version of Microsoft 365 hosted in the Microsoft US Government Community Cloud. You need to qualify as a government organization before purchasing. You cannot simply sign up for it. There are also multiple levels of the Microsoft 365 Government SKU depending on what type of information you will store in there and what certification your government agency might need. The three different levels are the Microsoft 365 Government GCC, GCC High, and the top one, which is the DoD. Now, let's talk about how to purchase Microsoft 365. While there are many ways, we'll cover the two main ones, which are either directly from Microsoft or from a Microsoft Cloud Solutions provider, also commonly called a CSP. Let's take a look at the differences between the two. First of all, when you buy from Microsoft, you pay a fixed fee, and the payment models are usually either per month or per year, while from a CSP, usually have more flexible payment options such as monthly, quarterly, yearly, bi-yearly, and so on. With Microsoft, some subscriptions, as we've seen in this module for the Microsoft 365 Business, need an annual commitment, so you don't have as much flexibility of alternating number of workers throughout the year, versus a CSP where usually offer flexible commitment options. Next up, when you buy from Microsoft, you get the service, of course, that you pay for, as well as Microsoft 365 support for administrators, whereas some CSPs might offer some free training or support in order to get you to sign with them. Remember that the reasons why CSPs offer more services is because they, of course, get a commission from Microsoft on your license sales, and every CSP tries to offer different discounts or benefits in order for you to choose them as your partner. Don't hesitate to shop around, find a deal that works for you, and more importantly, find a CSP that you trust, because once you're with a CSP, it's not always that easy to switch to another one, so make sure you shop around and find the most trusted partner that offers you the best solution. Now let's talk a bit about Microsoft 365 support, and we'll talk about the official Microsoft way here. With Microsoft 365 support, administrators with the right role can open tickets through the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. When you open a ticket, you'll be contacted by phone, and as you can see on the screenshot here on the left, you have an estimated wait time until you get called. The next steps really depend on what the problem is and what debugging options are available. As for the SLA, I have put a screenshot here directly from Microsoft, and as you can see, it really depends on the severity and what subscription you are on, whether business or enterprise. For critical events, both options offer 24/7 technical support and 1-hour response time, but after that, the available hours and response time are very different between business and enterprise. Now let's talk a bit about the Microsoft 365 service lifecycle. Since you are on a Microsoft 365 subscription, all of your services will always be up to date, and that includes your Office programs installed on your computer, to your operating system, all the way to the productivity tools in Office 365. New features that get implemented go to certain stages before going fully public. Usually, Microsoft does a private preview with select customers to get their feedback and improve the feature, after which it goes into public preview. At this point, the feature set is usually defined, but they will test it here for scalability and if any other bugs are found. And finally, it's released to all tenants, and that is called general availability. It's important to know that the support level you get for a feature might vary until it's in general availability, and preview features might not be very well or at all supported. This, of course, depends on the feature. For example, if you're in that private preview and you work directly with Microsoft, you might get the best support you've ever gotten. But if it's in public preview, you're just testing it out in your tenant and you go through the regular support channels, you might find yourself not supported at all because it's a preview feature. Lastly, some features in preview might be free or included part of the base plan, but some of them might require additional licensing once they reach general availability. This was more often the case with Office 365 standalone rather than with a Microsoft 365 subscription, but it's still something that can happen. Let's start by looking at who secures what in a cloud computing scenario. I always say that security in the cloud is a partnership between the cloud provider and you as the client. At a high level, the cloud provider operates and secures the base infrastructure, and most of the time, the host operating system layers while you control and secure the identities, for example, and any extra additional application settings. For example, setting up multi-factor authentication. This is not a set-in-stone list, the responsibility highly depends on the service type that you have hosted. For example, in an infrastructure as a service, the customer has a lot more responsibilities than in a software as a service. If we look at our four most common deployment types: on-premises, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and finally, software as a service. Let's start by talking about on-premises, which is the easiest one. Basically, on-premises, the customer is responsible for securing everything from the physical data center to the network, host, application, all the way to the data governance and rights management. If we move on to infrastructure as a service, the cloud provider now takes care of the physical data center, physical network, and physical hosts. However, everything over it, such as operating system, application, account, and access management, falls under your responsibility as a client. Moving on to platform as a service, the customer has less things to worry about, and some of them, as you see, have a split responsibility. Remember that platform as a service allows customers to put their own code on a platform ran by the provider. So for the application part, it's split because if the code you put on there contain vulnerabilities, it's the customer's responsibility, not the cloud provider's. There are different things such as account and access management, client endpoints, data and governance, and rights management will still always be the responsibility of the customer. Lastly, software as a service, where the cloud provider hosts and therefore is responsible of most security settings. Even in the service type, security will always be a partnership and the customer is responsible for account and access management, client endpoints, as well as the data governance and rights management. This is pretty generic to every cloud provider out there, but going back to Microsoft 365, which is the topic of today's course, you might wonder, what tools do I have as a Microsoft 365 customer to secure my parts and my responsibility of the cloud? Most of those tools to secure your part of the cloud are in the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, also known as EMS. EMS is an intelligent mobility management and security platform. It helps protect and secure your organization and empowers your employees to work in new and flexible ways. EMS is made out of multiple products, the main ones being Azure Active Directory, Microsoft Intune, Azure Information Protection, Microsoft Cloud App Security, Microsoft Advanced Threat Analytics, and Azure Advanced Threat Protection. While not going into details in this module, those are really the main products out there to secure Microsoft 365. Let's start by learning what Azure Active Directory is. Azure Active Directory, often called AAD, is a cloud-based identity and access management service. AAD stores objects, and those objects can be, for example, a user or a group. Each object has attributes attached to it. So for example, an attribute can have first name, last name, manager, and so on, and if it's a user object, of course it also have an encrypted password attached to them. Azure Active Directory is the backbone identity provider for all of Microsoft's cloud services such as Office 365, Azure, Intune, and so on. Something to note is that Active Directory as a server or service has existed for over 20 years already as an on-premises service. It was shipped with Windows Server 2000. You might also see it named as Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS. Most enterprises today still have an on-premises Active Directory as their main identity provider and where all of their users are stored. Let me explain. If you started a business today, you would probably go fully in the cloud and go directly with Azure Active Directory, which would be the backbone of all of your cloud services, and you probably wouldn't be renting a data center or server space, everything would be mostly in the cloud. However, if you started a business a few years ago, you probably had most of your services on premises, including your Active Directory and all of your servers, such as file servers, mail servers, database servers, and so on. But now that you want to take advantage of the cloud, you need to synchronize your users to Azure Active Directory, and Microsoft provides a tool for that called Azure AD Connect. This will make sure that all of your users are synchronized from your on-premises Active Directory to your Azure Active Directory in the cloud, and users will keep the same attributes, including username, password, manager, display name, and so on. You can then have users access cloud applications using the exact same credentials that they use for their on-premises systems. Now that we know what Azure Active Directory is, let's take a look at the different plans and features. Azure Active Directory comes in 4 editions: Free, Basic, Premium P1, and Premium P2. Often when we talk about the premium versions, we only say Azure AD P1 or Azure AD P2, but their official naming convention is Premium P1 and Premium P2. There is a 5th edition out there, and it's not really an edition from a billing point of view, but from a technical point of view, it's a 5th differentiation when you are subscribed to Microsoft 365 services. This 5th edition is basically the free edition, but with a lot less limitations on Microsoft 365 paid services. We'll explain this a bit more in just a few seconds. Let's take a look at some of the highlights of the 4 main editions. First, the free one, which is included with any Azure or Microsoft 365 subscription. This subscription has a 500,000 object limit, but no limit for Microsoft 365 applications. As long as the users are licensed for any Microsoft 365 app, you will not hit that limit, even if you have 10 million users. You can also have a maximum of 10 single sign-on apps per user, and again, all of the applications in Office 365 count as a single one. You can also have multi-factor authentication, or MFA, included, but only for Office 365 services, and not for any third-party service. The next one is the basic, at $1 per user per month. This one has no object limit at all, and includes a bunch of services that are not only for Office 365 apps such as group-based access management, SLA, being able to brand the login page with the company logo and message, and things like that. The Premium P1 is $6 per user per month, and this one has no limit on SSO apps. From a security perspective, the really special thing about it, it's the conditional access based on device or location, as well as the multi-factor authentication for non-Microsoft or on-prem services. Lastly, the Premium P2 is $9 per user per month, which includes everything in P1, Basic, and Free of course, as well as identity protection, enhanced access reviews, and privileged identity management. Let's start by doing an introduction to mobile device management, or MDM. Mobile device management is an industry term for the administration of mobile devices such as smartphones, tablet computers, and laptops. The intent of MDM is also to secure mobile devices and corporate data, especially in a bring-your-own-device world. Common mobile device management features include password enforcement, which means making sure that all mobile devices are locked by a PIN or password and setting the minimum requirements. We also have the data encryption enforcement, which can make sure that all of the data on devices is encrypted. Data inventory and tracking in order to make sure that you have an inventory of all of your devices with corporate data or access to corporate systems. And also a very common one, remote wiping, of course, if necessary. When, for example, a device gets lost, remote wiping would make sure that no one would be able to have access to the data on that device. Now that we have looked at MDM, let's take a look at Mobile Application Management, or MAM. Mobile Application Management software enables IT administrators to apply and enforce corporate policies on mobile apps, and to limit the sharing of corporate data amongst apps. It also enables the separation of enterprise apps and data from personal content on the same device. Other common MAM features and capabilities include software delivery, often through an enterprise app store, or simply help with licensing management. The big benefit of mobile app management versus MDM is really that MDM is able to manage the device, but with the new bring your own device world where we have a single device for both our personal and our work lives, it's more and more important for enterprises to only take control of the corporate aspect of your device and be able to control only that part while leaving the personal apps and content alone. Now that we know what mobile device management and mobile application management are, let's take a look at what Microsoft offers in this space. Microsoft doesn't only have one, but multiple services for MDM and MAM, and most of those services can either work together or be fully separate. The three services or tools that Microsoft offers are System Center Configuration Manager, MDM for Office 365, and Microsoft Intune. Let's take a look at some of the differences between them. The most basic one in a way is MDM for Office 365. This is a basic MDM solution included with most Office 365 subscriptions, and it can manage iOS, Android, and Windows mobile devices. It allows for basic MDM functionality such as setting and managing security policies and remote wipe. Microsoft Intune, on the other side, is a full MDM and MAM solution, and requires an EMS subscription or a separate Intune subscription, or if you have Microsoft 365, you already have it included as part of that Microsoft 365 subscription. It includes all MDM for Office 365 features and more, with the ability to manage Mac OS X devices, the ability to deploy apps, and also have in-app policies, for example, restricting copy/paste of data from certain applications. Lastly, System Center Configuration Manager, which is not a new tool. System Center Configuration Manager, also called SCCM, has been there for quite a few years, and it's been used to manage traditional clients or desktops. SCCM is part of the System Center suite that has 4 or 5 other applications, and it can be integrated with Microsoft Intune for a hybrid MDM and MAM approach, allowing you to manage all of your devices from traditional desktops running out Windows 7 to the latest iPhone and Android devices. Now that we have done an overview of all of the options, let's focus a bit on Microsoft Intune and see what features it offers. Intune, first of all, is a service that can be managed directly from the Azure portal, and it doesn't have its own admin center. Let's take a look at a few of the interesting features we can manage from there. First of all, device compliance policies. Device compliance policies allow you to set minimum help and security requirements. You can set things such as updates, encryptions, password types, even blocking USB debugging on devices. So those really allow you to make sure that the devices themselves are secure and up to standard. Non-compliant devices will be placed on the non-compliant list where you can take additional actions. Intune also allows you to add and manage client applications. Those client applications can either be from the App Store or Google Play Store, or built in-house by simply uploading the packaged app file. You can then add app protection policies to those apps. Those policies allow you to add requirements at the app level instead of the device level, for example, blocking a user from copy/pasting information from an app or requiring a PIN to open certain apps or encrypting the information from that application. Microsoft Intune also allows you to create VPN profiles and deploy them to your clients. This way, users can quickly connect to the VPN, without having to configure too many settings themselves and accessing internal apps and files. This is it for the most used features in Intune. Let's start by learning what is regulatory compliance exactly. We hear the term compliance in IT a lot, and compliance on its own means conforming to a rule, such as a specification, policy, standard, or law. When we talk about compliance in IT, we actually talk about regulatory compliance, which is the goal that organizations aspire to achieve in their efforts to ensure that they are aware of and take steps to comply with relevant laws, policies, and regulations. Some example regulations are the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, or HIPAA, which applies to all health organizations in the U.S., the Federal Information Security Management Act or FISMA for federal organizations, and others such as HACCP, the famous GDPR, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about lately, and PCI DSS for credit card organizations. But how is IT impacted by those regulations? With more and more information being digitalized, therefore controlled by IT, most of those regulatory compliance standards include provisions that affect IT. There are simple ones, for example, most of them require detailed access logs for certain types of information, and HIPAA, for example, requires that those logs are kept for a minimum of 6 years. There are more advanced and complicated ones such as regularly test security systems and processes. For example, PCI DSS requires you to run an internal and external network vulnerability scan at least quarterly and after any significant change in the network. So you can see how those requirements can put a strain on IT, especially in planning, whenever you introduce a new system, having that scan done, and all those kinds of tasks that you need to plan in your day-to-day IT life. What if you're not compliant? Well, there are two sorts of penalties, and of course it all depends on a lot of things. Most of the time it's a fine, which can be substantial for an organization, and there have even been cases where people also went to prison and had legal problems. So it's definitely important to follow all of the regulations that your organization is subject to. Now that we know what regulatory compliance is, how does Microsoft help us achieve it? One of the main parts of this answer is the Microsoft Service Trust Portal. The Service Trust Portal is a single location where you can find audit reports, pen tests, security assessments, and more information on how Microsoft manages security, privacy, and compliance. The Service Trust Portal provides a ton of information and requires audit and pen test reports and security information for different regulatory requirements. Since Microsoft hosts the infrastructure, they also need to do the audits on that part that they host and manage. So one of the advantages of the cloud is that since Microsoft is doing those audit and pen tests, internal IT doesn't have to do them. The Service Trust Portal also has a ton of information such as white papers on upcoming regulatory requirements. Another big part is the Microsoft Compliance Manager. The Compliance Manager is a workflow-based risk assessment tool located in the Microsoft Service Trust Portal that enables you to track, assign, and verify your organization's regulatory compliance activities related to Microsoft professional services and Microsoft Cloud services such as Office 365, Dynamics 365, and Azure. One of the things we will see when we look at the Compliance Manager in the lab in a few minutes is what I had mentioned at the beginning of this course: security in the cloud is a partnership. You can already see it in the screenshot that I have here. Most of the actions or requirements are split into two categories: Microsoft managed and consumer managed. Since Microsoft manages the infrastructure, they make sure that all of their action items are always taken care of, but there are always tasks that will need to be taken care of by you as the customer. And the Compliance Manager makes it easy for you to follow, assign, and review those tasks to make sure that you are compliant. Now that we have seen the Service Trust Portal and Compliance Manager, let's talk about Office 365 data loss prevention. Data loss prevention is really important in terms of regulatory compliance because most regulatory requirements only apply to a subset of the total information that you own as an enterprise. For example, credit card information, personally identifiable information, or PII, such as a social security number, passport, driver license, patient information. It doesn't usually apply to stuff like sales brochures and other generic information that you might have inside the organization. But how do you make sure that users don't accidentally misplace or misuse sensitive information? This is where data loss prevention, or DLP, comes in. DLP allows you to identify sensitive information across many services, such as Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams. Furthermore, it easily allows you to add rules or action when that information is discovered, such as preventing the accidental sharing of sensitive information or making it hidden when it's uploaded somewhere until it's reviewed. You can create rules both on common types of information, so let's say a social security number, or build your own sensitive information type, such as a patient file, which might be built in a way that is unique to your organization. By using Office 365 DLP, you can quickly identify this sensitive information and make sure that it's not misplaced or misused by users inside your organization.